it?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
a good sale. I like that they posted so many couches.
Yeah, they're very good about that.
I did
I think that it should be working. I hope. I said I had everything set up, so maybe you can look to see if anyone says anything. You sure you want to do that? Because I should have had one. Does that look like that's it?
Like that's what I always want at those record sales. It's like they display
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I got everything. You have to have I mean, it's like there. You know, like it's functioning because we don't really want to do anything. So that's the reason I just put that stuff yeah. And so there, yes. So that's the whole thing. Fine. We need to like well, I tried to put like replace it. Yeah. Well, they didn't think this is good. Yeah, so I know. So your heart would have been palpitating.
What's that? I'm nervous that I'm going to get I can know.
You know what I mean? But I mean, it is like hurricane season. They're supposed to get hail today. There was a branch down in my neighbor's house
I'm nervous most days.
that like landed over, knocked over.
I don't know why.
I
don't love speaking in front of people, but I fake it really. Yeah.
I get it.
Ready? I'm killing this right here. I think I might just leave it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Leo is the speaker. We should test. It's okay. Right. Welcome to the a little louder. Is that better? 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 Okay. Remember that. I have to take my glasses off to read. Very sad state of things. So welcome to the Leo, Luke, Marcello reading series. Usually it is a poetry series, but this year we are expanding it to include a fiction writer. Leo was a long-time faculty member. I don't know, does anyone know? I didn't do my homework, so how long was he here for?
He came in 81.
81. So, you know, from 81 right up until his death, right?
He was gone for a few years.
He was a few years, okay. But I remember Leo because I was a very young faculty member, not that young, but I was a new faculty member and teaching all composition classes, 5 composition classes. I was an instructor, and I was on the same office wing where most of the historians are now, and as he was. And I would always go by, I would just be like, 150 papers are good. And I'd go by his office all the time, and there's like this energy coming out of his office, and you could just, his love of what he was doing. And even for, you know, he did teach the undergrad creative writing classes, but his love, like in 102, he was like, what do you do in 102? And he'd be like, oh, I do art, they have to have art, and we like cover all this stuff, and you could hear him talking to the students in the office, and he's just so excited, and he just, like, I don't know, he could just speak in a way that it didn't seem like art with a capital A. This seemed like something that was part of our, that should be a part of everyone's life. And it's interesting because there's a show by Bill Isles, another former faculty member, but he has a big family portrait as a centerpiece in that show of a sad event of when his younger brother was hit by a car. But it's Leo's dad, I believe, was a doctor, right? Was in that, is a primary figure in that painting, as checking on the boy, the little brother. And so I thought that was a nice coincidence. And then at Bill Isles' talk last night, he talked a lot about dads, and so I'm just going to read just a little tiny poem that seems like it's to Leo's writing to his dad. And it also feels like fall and winter, which I think we need right now. It's called Burning Leaves. Father, in an instant, the odor of burning leaves brings you back to me, standing by the metal cans where you stirred up smoke from the cinder-hot pecan leaf inferno, singeing some back-hidden pleasure center of our brains by sending pungent arrows of pulsing fire clouds up through breath. A cold winter day years ago when you were alive and burning leaves out back was legal. So tonight, it's a really exciting night for us because we have 2 new MFA faculty members, which is just, in our current system, it's hard to believe. And so it's a really exciting time for the program with all the changes that we've had. And so I'd like to just welcome Vallie Lynn Watson and Michael Robbins tonight for a little reading. And remember, we're going bowling right after, although I never did confirm, so we might have to duke it out for Allie's when we get there. I'm going to run off and do that. I shouldn't tell you that. So it's a hard bowling alley to deal with, which I think should be appropriate with all bowling alleys. Should probably be hard to deal with. So. Lynn Watson is the author of the novel A River So Long. Her Pushcart-nominated short stories appear in forthcoming in magazines such as Pang, Gargoyle, Decomp magazine, which I'm fascinated by. Watson earned her doctorate in creative writing from the University of Southern Mississippi Center for Writers in 2009. And Michael Robbins, who will be reading second. Robbins is the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently Bright Invisible. You can see them over there. People You May Know, both from Saturnalia Books. His work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in American Poetry Review, Simon Review, Copper Nickel, the Lowell Review, and the Best American Poetry in 2022. Okay. And so with that, I am going to get out of here, and not to the bowling alley yet, but and welcome to Lynn.
I'm very, very excited to be here. Can you hear me? I'm short.
I should have adjusted it.
How about that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I'm going to read 4 short pieces. My new colleague is worried that I'm going to read much shorter than he is, but I'll try to talk very, very slow in that case. As I was picking out works to read tonight, I noticed a theme sort of emerge of full-circledness and starting over, new beginnings, and moving on. One of those new beginnings is that this is the first reading I've ever done with glasses, so bear with me, I'll be doing a lot of that. The first piece I want to read is an old standby, an old friend, really. I chose it because it feels particularly appropriate for tonight, and really for me just being here in Louisiana. The story was written in Louisiana, about Louisiana, New Orleans in this case, and it was the first story and is the title story of my novel, In Flash. And that in itself is pretty full circle, but the novel has become this sort of harbinger, which is a word that's going to come up in my last story, of my life. novel, which I started in 2007, like I said, and published in 2012, the protagonist lives in Arizona, North Carolina, and Louisiana. Before and even after this was published, I had not lived in either of these places, but since then I have lived in North Carolina, Arizona, and here we are. So I have written you all into my story. I just didn't quite realize it. So for my next book, I'm going to become a millionaire, and I'm going to count everybody in my phone again. All right, A River So Long. Veronica met Van on a Friday evening in New Orleans in a double-bedded Marriott room, 32 floors above the winds of the Mississippi. He went to sleep around 3. Naked, she rolled the desk chair up to the window, sat and pulled the drapes around her, a full wall of cape. From the other side of the river, a steamboat pushed across, landed on the near side. After a few minutes, it took off again, went under the bridge a few hundred yards downstream, and stopped again on the same side. She thought she was still watching, but soon realized it was back at point A. It made the triangular trip again and again, then the sun started to come up. At 5:12, the river turned silver as if it were frozen. She traced the river's curves on the window with her finger, wishing it were her. The river narrowed out of view. The sun stung her eyes, so she came out from behind the curtains, dressed, and went to the lobby for coffee. When she came back up, she asked him to leave, even though they'd planned for 2 nights. She watched him dress. After he left, she took off her clothes again and sat at the window all day until the sun started to go down. Then she stood and pushed her forehead, her breast, her belly against the cold window. The boat on the other side of the river started to work. The next story I'm going to read is called Mandala. How do you say Mandala? Mandala? The circle? The circle? Is that better?
Yeah.
Mandala. The circle with the, yes, okay. He always walked me to my car when I left his house, so stealing his albums was tricky. Not stealing, borrowing. I started in month 2, initially 1 album at a time, always only the record itself. He'd have to excuse himself to the restroom 5 or 6 times an evening, and I'd barefoot across his new carpet to just outside his bedroom, where the shelves began. I would slip an album out of the cover and into my messenger bag, take them home until our next engagement. He usually asked me back within a week, and afterward, put it back in its cover, fetch a fresh one. By month 3, I was exchanging 10 albums at a time, and by month 6, 18 albums at a time, the most I could carry in my pack. He never mentioned any missing, and he certainly hadn't noticed the condition I returned them in. He said he had not played music since the summer, but I was scared he didn't want me around for the music. I always made the short drive home in silence. I missed him in the in-between. Sometimes there were phone calls about our day, about our faraway families. He did most of the talking while I painted on his records, repeating dots, lines, and swirls, starting around the center label and fanning out, playing the record backwards, blowing fine-tipped brushes over the surface of the grooved vinyl until side A was nothing but a kaleidoscope of color. I bought a kid's turntable and let the B-sides play wavily, lifted by the uneven, dry paint beneath while I slept. The next thing I'm going to read is a short essay, and it is another sort of bit of full circleness for me. I have, as probably many of us do, a complicated relationship with the Deep South, and I've left the Deep South, but for some reason I keep getting grad opportunities and jobs back in the Deep South, and so I have finally realized that the Deep South is actually my home, that I am where I am supposed to be. This is a short essay crafted around the song Blinded by the Lights, and it is also a thank you note to my senior high school class. Revved up like a what? Thank you to the St. John's class of 1992. My favorite music was produced between the years 1968 and 1986, the latter year mostly due to the usual early teen nostalgia about pop radio. I was born in 1973 to parents in their late 30s. My brother and sister were born in the 1950s. We lived all over the U.S. and the world until my parents retired and moved to their very deep southern hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, a place I'd only known by our yearly visits. I'd spent an exciting 6th grade year in a public junior high school in Houston, where my class numbered in the hundreds and exhibited some racial diversity. Upon beginning 7th grade, I found myself among 39 white and 1 black native Montgomeryans who had known each other since kindergarten, who knew to say ma'am and sir, who knew to stand when a teacher walked in the room. Any confidence I'd gained in my 12 short years was shot. I was lost. The song with the funky break. The year was 1986, and I clutched tightly onto the little music I knew at that time. I played over and over the dozens of cassettes I'd recorded from my favorite Houston radio station. I can't recite from memory what songs were on those tapes until I hear one elsewhere. Then I even remember, as it's ending, what would have played after. Anytime I hear Bananarama's song Cruel Summer, I will always expect Def Leppard's Rock of Ages to rudely cut in after the line, "So I had to get up and go," a timing error I'd made on one of those recordings. But Mama, that's where the fun is. From my current comfortable perch of middle age, I know that new school was full of lovely people that tried to include me, who treated me more kindly than most 13-year-olds are capable. But I was a teenager, hormonal, determined to be miserable there, and after 2 years, I finally convinced my reluctant parents to let me begin 9th grade at another private school. This one slightly more diverse and relaxed. I made friends immediately. Where they expected least. The year was 1988, and the music was shit. Over the next 4 years, our small class adopted Manfred Mann's 1984 Blinded by the Light as our unofficial song, and we tentatively worked backwards from there, exploring first the generic 70s classic rock that played on 95.1. Then we branched out into the B-sides as we gained the ability to browse and purchase music from our mall music store. Our class felt compartmentalized, not so much out of divisiveness, but teenage apathy, and sometimes it felt like our odd anthem was the only thing we all shared. In retrospect, I see the fluidity of those compartments, and a lot of my overlap will be forever bound to music. My first parentless concert, Eric Clapton with Deanne, exchanging mixtapes with Stephanie to cope with our respective breakups. These musical connections bound us through college and beyond. With the teenage diplomat. The year was 1995, and we were no longer teenagers who saw each other daily, but young adults who instead regrouped during holidays and summers. On a day in early August, in an order that I don't remember, I learned that Jerry Garcia died and that my mother only had a few months left to live. That evening, alone in our big house, I sat on my bathroom floor in the dark and called a handful of friends to let them know about my mom. Trey, my senior prom date, sometimes best friend, sometimes greatest antagonist, answered amongst noise and explained that some of our friends were at his apartment listening to the Grateful Dead and celebrating Jerry. Trey knew that I wouldn't want to deal with the crowd, losing my voice, and offered to meet me at the nearby church, my church, the church where I would later marry another St. James boy from a different class to walk around. I declined, but I still imagined that ghost walk better than if we'd actually met that day. Knowing I had a tribe was all I needed. She's going to make it through the night. Thank you, St. James class of 1992. You gave me music again, and you made me feel at home. And a belated thank you to the class of 92 from the Montgomery Academy. You starred the incomparable Meg, one of my best friends, and I wish I'd taken the time to get to know the rest of you. Finally, a belated apology to Bruce Springsteen. I didn't know until after a good 10 years after graduation that you actually wrote our anthem and recorded a much better version of it. Manfred Mann left out one of your best lines. Asked him which was the way back home. Now I know who to call on anytime I need help. And then, finally, my last piece is a drabble. A drabble is a piece of short fiction of exactly 100 words. But I confess I did not actually write this. I constructed this drabble. On the first day of my MFA fiction class, I had my new lovely students write drabbles. And I promised them that I would write one too, but after I read theirs, I couldn't do it because theirs was so lovely. So I made a found poem out of their drabble. So 82 of these 100 words are theirs. I had to add in a few to make sense. So thank you. All right. This is called Found. The thing about ghost towns is that the restless are without thread or imprint. They wander not the molten mornings, but early dusk, seeking opportunities to wait, seeking a mutually private respite. There are no thoughts of after this, the next 5 years, tomorrow, and after that. When they see the sand in crevices, they realize precisely what else had sunk deeper into the soft earth. They dig further until they hit the layer of ancient star balls, humongous harbingers of the future. The next day, they present them to their leader. "Ooh," says Oprah as she ogles her sea difference.
napkins under here. All right. Thank you all for being here. And thanks to Mike and Keegan and Dr. Buckles. All here, all a hand in some ways, big and small, and probably both, in bringing me to McNeese State University. I'm tempted to thank Dr. Burkell, but then it's a slippery slope, and I've been thanking the mayor of Lake Charles and the governor of Louisiana, the president of the United States, but I am indeed grateful. I might read a little bit longer than life, but we did not discuss beforehand. But I've cut it down just a little bit, even the last few minutes. So when I'm teaching, I really appreciate it when students turn me on to new writers, introduce me to new writers, and I am really grateful too when students remind me of writers that I already love, but maybe they've been on the back shelf, so to speak. And earlier this week, Caitlin brought in an excerpt from a poem by Muriel Rukeyser, and I thought I would just open with a different Muriel Rukeyser poem here for you. I don't have the year of her birth. I know she passed away in 1980, and this is from her book, Breaking Open, from 1973. It's just a short, little 9-line poem, and it's called The Word Fisher. I know what I want in my words, but it will not turn into song, and it's not worth the listening. To make my song really good listening, that's pretty hard. But listen, some clumsy song is in the making and is made. So I'm going to share with you some of my own clumsy songs here. The first of which, I'll just say a few words. I almost drowned when I was a boy. I'm sure memory has built it up, and I wasn't that close to drowning, but it's left its mark. This poem is not about that, but it is a poem that's a little bit about muscle memory of returning to the Atlantic Ocean one summer, and upon stepping in the water, having this wave of feeling based on the experience of my last visit to the Atlantic Ocean the summer before. The ordinary inexplicable. On the first day in the warm, salty waters, and slipping beyond their break, such fear came back to me from long ago and forever when, greedy for one last swim, we shuffled early through the sand and shallows, the pebble and shell before the depths and holy joy of floating, lifting with each wave mid-sentence, and before any sense or inkling of drifting a little farther out, the dark ocean pulled harder than whatever dig I could muster against its currents, just like that. And I forgot the conversation, what it was anyone might be saying, for it felt like the nestlings tipped, like a hank of wet yarn unspooling, or the weight of glass containing all the facts, measured recipes and what iota I might know of the 1860s, the end of loneliness and birds, the old summers climbing cherry trees with our brothers and sisters, and not even time nor heart to think of my family sleeping somewhere right over there, maybe a stone thrown twice, tucked inside a rented house, and yet I lived long enough to tell you how like music the panic filled my body, fell silent again, and my friends with whom I swam never knew a thing. There's a few prose poems in this book, and I am a sucker for literary graves. I don't know how many I've been to. I've been to a lot. My kids, who are now sitting 15 seats apart up in the peanut gallery up there, they just love it when I drag them into cemeteries an hour out of our way in New England or wherever it might be. Where am I going here? This one goes back to the end of my graduate school days, just as I was finishing up at UMass Amherst, which also coincided with the end of a short-lived exchange of vows. This is about visiting Edna St. Vincent Millay's grave. and the title I've borrowed from her, though we should love once more. At the end of our marriage, as anyone should, we turned to the poets. A cigarette with Bishop and Wooster, half an hour with Frost behind an old white church, and lastly in the hamlet of Austerlitz, a kind of reckoning at the former Blueberry Farm, where Edna St. Vincent Millay played the part of the difficult wife, and then, through that final year, the widow. We'd stood up Millay before, paired guestwork with the AAA map, and wandered the public cemetery blind, drove East Hill Road to photograph the brackish pool, the quiet house in which we swore the faint shadows of a dress. The afternoon collapsed, spilled forward into weeks and months. One summer, a humid matrimony. The next, the last of our mid-20s swerved towards Steepletop. Past a clean placard and headlong down its trail, we pressed an ear at last on Millay's resting stone. By then, of course, in those New England woods, there was no we. Alone and without so much as a word, I asked of my teachers only everything. One of my teachers at UMass Amherst was James Tate, and I saw him read a number of times, and there was always water there, but he refused to drink water during his readings. And he just said that he was just certain, absolutely certain, he would just spill it all over the place. So he just never did it. But it is a little strange to drink water in front of, however many eyes are watching at this moment. This is an Outer Banks poem. Y'all know what horseshoe crabs are? They're kind of these prehistoric, alien-looking creatures, and they have a very long tail. I think there's an official name for it. And while gathering shells and stones in the Outer Banks, I didn't even see it. There was a dead horseshoe crab, and I ended up stepping. The tail just came at the right angle and got me pretty good. And this is a poem that came out of that. I think I was reading a little Sylvia Plath at the time, so it feels influence for sure. Diamond Shoals. What a jolt. No polished stone, nor summer sleeping by the sea, but like a hinge pointed loosely from its armor, the late and holy lance of a horseshoe finds her soft, unsuspecting mark. Let the corollary show flies like midair ember, a rabbit's grin, not unscathed between the dune and waterline, while the pebbly moon strikes to it budding schoolboys, peeling away bare, wild with trembling, who give their dash as if drunk on the heavens. Nearly I'm quilled, nearly bliss in what's bled, yet onwardly bleeds. O lifeless fossil, ghost of the unchristened soldier, surely now you've met the deckhand and thief, each risen and flattened again for your spear, lickety through the feet. Whatever stand remains like nerve puts a finger there, bears down, deep and crazed inside the sting, until not even the gods thick with clot come calling, not even to the cusp where they say the ocean eases terror, washes smooth our sins like the eye and thread as they mend almost the skin. It took like 2 years for that to heal. Very strange injury. Kindergarten. That's not the name. That's the situation for this poem. It's kindergarten. There's a questionable phrase, word here, but it's what we used at the time. Bottled in glass where the flavor lasts. We repeat thank you and please. Practice new letters of the week. We ready our crayons to circle Miss Edmondson's glasses, looping from her collar the pale purple bow. We say Indian crisscrossing down to the rug, the various leaves stapled neatly, all the numbers we'll ever need, and beyond the high windows, cloud after cloud after cloud. We trace our hands at Thanksgiving, then count the rings, tear them one after one until there's no more red or green. By alphabet, we march to the library for the hour of music on Tuesdays. We lay our heads and warm breath across the tiny desks. We are cheddar sticks and juice from Dixie's. We are dry-eyed when Joey Hawkins cries. Each morning, our mothers leave us at the door. Just watching what they're doing up there in the dark. This feels a little bit like an odd book to me. Most of the poems were written pre-isolation. There's a few in here, maybe 2 or 3 poems that come at the end of 2020 or were written at the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021. And that feels odd only to me because in the summer of 2020, I wrote a lot of prose poems. The first day of summer, I wrote a prose poem, and then the second day of summer that year, I wrote a prose poem, and you get the idea, and it sort of kept going. So at the end of which, I think I had 93 poems. What I didn't know when I started was that I would be documenting this period of my life, which, among other things, included having to put our dog down, and then a few days later visiting my father for the last time, and then a month after that, the death of my partner and the mother of my kids. And so for the most part, that is not in this collection. But if I can be vulnerable here with you, which I feel like we can at McNeese State University for sure, I'm going to share just a few of those poems. It might be useful to know my wife was ill for about 4 years. And then in late July of 2020, we got the news that her cancer, which we seemed like we were going to just live with long term, we got news that that spread to her brain. Worst case scenario, I thought 6 to 8 months maybe. What we didn't know, and the doctors didn't know, is that we had 13 days. And so those doctors said, "You've got this trip planned to the Outer Banks. You should go. It's going to take us some time to figure out, the treatment plan and that kind of thing." And so we went to the Outer Banks. Hurricane Isaias sort of delayed us a little bit because the Outer Banks closed for a few days, so robbed us of that first half week. But we were able to make it there eventually for a few days. The headaches grew in intensity until Valerie asked, "I think I need to fly home." And so I drove her to the airport on August 8th, drove back to the Outer Banks to spend the last day of our vacation with our kids, not knowing that that would be the last time that we would see her. And I will just add that we had a 2-day drive ahead of us. I made the decision just to wait till we got home, and then tell the kids. And so I think they're the poems, 1 or 2 of these poems sort of make reference to that drive back to Chicago. Okay. I almost wrote that down, because as I was going through with my head earlier, I was like, how can I make that shorter? That was okay. These are all prose poems, as I said, in perfect lines across the deck. The sun, having lit all night the moon, catches and burns the veil of the clouds. The children, distracting us from outright despair, hurry after the crabs that scuttle like thread between dying and not dying, flattening their bodies out of danger beneath the sand. We hang our heads and stare nowhere when the doctor goes on talking. This hole where the fence caught a sleeve and the hibiscus hushed, almost the same as yesterday. By degrees, the brightness stretches the pastel of each house, the decorative fish and tawdry nets. The trail-side thorn, how it smarts, and these happy dogs, like old friends, running the length of the beach, despite the claps and calling to come back. Valerie says she would like to see our children graduate, and the doctor goes on talking. Such effort to encourage that light. We cannot worry about the weather, our lives and our flaws. The sand sleeps patiently near the sea. The ocean makes a home in every shell. Homecoming. On the other side of everything in rural Pennsylvania, up to the room with one coffee, not two, and why not? Another cemetery here on the hill. The ibuprofen slipped and dropped and too late down the bathroom sink. A little something for the overtime. This pair of days driving towards Chicago, and our children who don't know you were there and now you aren't. Who next to write? Who to call? Who wanted your toenails painted for the beach, and in my head the doctor's still talking until you're gone. Time will come for regret, every apology and crumb in the geometric patterns of the carpet next to the ice machine. For our anniversary, the roses I didn't know you no longer liked. These shifts of tense in a small town where you could spend your whole life, or half of one. In this borrowed bed, I ask the gods to unclench my fists. The remaining facts. On the hour, the full shuffled week since you said goodbye, I said goodbye. A pillow in your lap, and 6 days later, the boarding pass in the pocket of your black sweatshirt. I remember touching your leg to wake you, and if we erase the walls, you faced the ocean at the edge of the bed, waiting for your clothes. The torn nail from days ago, now nearly healed, and my difficulty hooking your bra. 3-4 steps outside, and I've been driving slower, like you asked, and letting go. Senseless happenstance in its rightful place, and not something more, not figurative nor overblown, yet we were waiting on one of many storms. Later, we left the highway for a wooded drive, and I learned the difference between widow and widower. Then I kissed your head through a paper mask. Okay, 2 more. Thanks for going with me there for a moment. I knew it was going to be kind of a dip, but I'm gonna pull us back up. I think Mike just said that we need fall and we need winter. Yeah, this poem is called Poem for the End of Winter, which I was thinking, I don't know if they need a poem like this in Louisiana. Chicago for sure, but, you know, as we all know, there are many kinds of winter. So I'm just reading 2 more poems. This is the longest I think I'm reading. Like a good reader, I clocked it at 3 minutes. So prepare yourselves. Poem for the End of Winter. Now that you've set down your pen, whatever waits next on the bull-headed list of to-do. Now, and by no accident, after a season ruptured, you clear the vines to reveal a threshold. Frost wept around the stones, and shortly, as the daffodils raise their arms, you'll try from the old depths your fair tune and say, as though for the first time, I can't believe she's gone, or Father, I love you, or I'm sorry it happened at all, and now I know how I was wrong. Perhaps, despite the weather and festered hope, there opens this other room when you understood there'd be 0 left, no capacity in the chest that trembles afraid, neither for the art of losing, tightened and strained unto itself, smaller, seemingly without air, to bear the frightful sail of your breath. Gently, this breeze nonetheless, and here now drifting between strangers up early walking their dogs, sleepy nods or rasping hello beneath the cold because our eyes, those stalled and those put out, they mirror our marrow, the motley shapes through which we sometimes imagine the soul like a church bell swung and beheld. In ache, hesitation, our hearts ring true and more precise than the careful, boring, dumbfounded words that stow the memory and those that send you headlong into a new life. You count the flowers, point to spring, and at the trailhead of the world, surrender your chair, a tired scarf like a rag left for the scrap and heap of such consequence, no bigger than the sliver, a comma, no bigger than the tail of that comma, no bigger than seed spun by the spider or the syllables of a name whispered in your ear, no bigger than a promise for the mending becomes us, owns no watch while the days invisibly collect behind the snag and broken branch in which, maybe tomorrow or a month thereafter, inch by inch begin to spill, let go, release. So it is we come to the cool, tall, and unfolding trees noted for such patience, and the birds not those of elegies but their missives unannounced, a swell likewise calling home, gathering from the ground every last snowdrop, and with due respect, ask only that we know our regret, return to the present hour, and choose differently, to notice how the darkest shadows ease toward green, and by similar tenderness, bask in the bounty that follows, a warmth you haven't yet forgotten. Like fingers of light that circle and lull your shoulder into its hold, and once more, this minute, now again, step into it. Gwen and I were recently talking about writing poems that are half empty versus the poems that are half full. And sometimes it's more difficult to write the poems that have that sense of being half full. Maybe it's getting over teenage angst or something, or ideas of what a poet is supposed to be doing. My hope is that this last poem is a half full, maybe even 3/4 full. Thank you all again for being here. Happy Friday. This is the title poem of this book. The Bright Invisible. Early such darkness, these oncoming nights ensure, I'm dull and even slow to concede how mornings make equal swerving measures there between those foremost shadows along the fence, among the chickens and nerve, sheep and their indifference to any pair of fools helpless in love, who visit through the cold, shortened, everyday hours like you and me until, oh yes, we take the prairie like pioneers, plumb the woods with the memory of wildflowers and the skinny, skinny leaves released so purely as the dead houses that will, come spring, vanish in fits of a blossom green, and the singular awakening in which we kiss, merely a blink, like the hurried bird across the canvas of life, and afterwards, in that heave, our mothers swell, our own fathers relish again in the flesh, and without, I'm told, any timeline for grief, or retrieving their clothes among the fallen trees where we sit together, feed the river like so, dare to welcome the center of this bare, wild kingdom, the brisk and wondrous possibility when we lean into the sun, close our eyes, and describe for each other what colors appear.
Thank you so much, Lynn and Michael. That was just amazing, and I'm just so happy that you guys came here, and I'm so excited about our future. So, and of course, for the rest of you, thank you for coming. And remember bowling? Maybe. Always do kitchen time falls through. Oh, we're going bowling. We're bowling. It's okay. I'm going to be optimistic. Right? And there are some snacks and candy which people seem most interested in. I got some, I think, retro candy. Does anyone eat Butterfingers anymore? I don't know if anyone eats Butterfingers. All right. So, all right, go.